You're 38. Not rich in the way people imagine when they hear the word, not private jets or headlines or strangers asking what you do for a living, but you're not worried about money anymore, and that's the difference that matters. You wake up on a weekday without an alarm, not because you have nowhere to be, but because nothing is forcing you out of bed, and for a moment you just sit there, noticing how quiet your mind is compared to what it used to be. There was a time when mornings felt like pressure, like you were already behind before your feet touched the ground, checking your phone, checking your balance, calculating how much room you had left before something broke. That version of you isn't gone, exactly, but is quieter now, like background noise you learned to turn down. You make coffee, the kind you used to skip because it felt unnecessary, and you don't think about the price, you think about the taste, which still feels slightly unreal if you pay attention to it. Your phone lights up with emails and messages, and none of them carry that old urgency, that sense that if you don't respond immediately something important might slip through your hands. You answer what matters, ignore what doesn't, and nothing collapses, which is still something you occasionally test without admitting it to yourself. You check your accounts, not obsessively, just to stay aware, and the numbers move the way numbers do, up, down, sideways, but your life isn't attached to their mood anymore. That took longer than you expected to learn, that it's not about winning every day, it's about building something that doesn't break when a few days go wrong, something that can carry you even when you're not at your best. You leave the house because you want to, not because you have to, and you remember how strange that idea used to sound when people talked about freedom like it was a real thing and not just something influencers said online. Back then, your life had edges you couldn't cross, limits that showed up every time you thought about quitting, resting, trying something different. You stayed longer than you should have, in jobs that drained you, in routines that made you smaller, telling yourself it was temporary until it quietly became normal, until the idea of leaving felt more dangerous than staying. That's how it almost ended for you, not with failure, but with drift, years stacking on top of each other until you stopped asking if this was the life you actually wanted, until you got used to a version of yourself that wasn't really trying anymore. The change didn't come from one big decision, it came from smaller ones that didn't feel important at the time, working late on something that didn't pay yet, learning skills nobody around you cared about, watching videos, reading things that didn't make sense until they slowly did, making your first money online and realizing it counted just as much as any salary even if it didn't look impressive to anyone else. You remember how slow it was in the beginning, how easy it would have been to stop. How many times it almost didn't work, and how you kept going anyway, not because you were confident, but because staying the same started to feel worse than failing, because there was a part of you that refused to believe this was all there was. You built something piece by piece, income streams that started small and grew, habits that made you sharper, decisions that didn't make sense to people who only saw the surface, people who thought you were chasing something unrealistic, something unstable, something that would fall apart the moment you relied on it. Maybe they weren't wrong at the time, maybe it was unstable in the beginning, maybe it could have failed, but you kept building anyway, you kept showing up even when the results didn't match the effort, even when the progress was invisible. There wasn't a single moment where everything changed, no dramatic switch from broke to successful, just a gradual shift until one day you realized your bills were covered without thinking, your time was yours to direct, and the fear that used to sit in your chest had been replaced by something steadier, something quieter but stronger. You remember the first time you didn't panic over an expense, something small, something ordinary, but it felt like a signal that things were different now, that you had crossed some invisible line you couldn't see before. You remember the first time you turned down something you would have said yes to before, not because you couldn't do it, but because you didn't need to, and that felt unfamiliar in a way you couldn't explain. You start to notice how much of your old life was built around necessity, around doing things because you had no choice, and how different it feels to move through your days by choice instead. You still work, you still build, you still push yourself, but the energy is different now, it's not coming from fear, it's coming from direction, from knowing where you're going and why. You think about the version of you that used to scroll through other people's lives, comparing, measuring, wondering how they got there, wondering what you were missing, and you realize how incomplete those pictures were, how much they left out, how much of the process was invisible. You understand now that nobody sees the middle, the long stretch where nothing seems to happen, where you question everything, where progress feels slow and uncertain, and most people stop because they think that means it's not working. You didn't stop. That's the part that matters more than anything else, not talent, not luck, not timing, just the decision to keep going when it would have been easier to quit. You still have doubts sometimes, you still have days where things don't go your way, where something breaks, where you feel that old pressure trying to come back, but it doesn't stay the way it used to, it passes, because you've built something that can absorb it, something that doesn't collapse under stress. You start to see money differently too, not as something to chase or prove, but as a tool, something that gives you options, something that expands what's possible instead of defining your worth. You stop trying to impress people who were never paying attention in the first place, and you start focusing on what actually matters to you, what kind of life you want to live when nobody is watching. You realize that making it isn't a finish line you cross once, it's something you maintain, something you protect, something that requires attention even after you've built it, because it's easy to slip back into old patterns if you're not careful. You become more aware of your time, how you spend it, who you spend it with, what you allow into your life, because you understand now that time is the only thing you can't earn back. You think about the people who were there in the beginning, the ones who supported you, the ones who doubted you, the ones who didn't notice at all, and you see them differently now, not with resentment, but with clarity, understanding that everyone is operating from their own perspective, their own limits, their own fears. You don't need them to understand your path anymore. You understand it yourself. And that's enough. You look at your life now, not as something perfect, not as something finished, but as something real, something you built deliberately, something that reflects your choices instead of your circumstances. You're not trying to escape anymore. You're not waiting for something to change. You're here, fully in it, aware of what it took to get here and what it takes to stay. And the thought arrives quietly, without drama, without the need to announce it to anyone, the same way most important realizations do. You made it. Not in the way you once imagined, not in the way people talk about online, but in the way that actually matters, the way that changes how you wake up, how you move through the day, how you see yourself when nobody else is around. You made it, and more importantly, you understand what it cost, what it required, and why it was worth it. And for the first time in a long time, maybe ever, you're not looking for the next escape. You're not trying to become someone else. You're just living, fully, in a life that finally feels like your own. And even now you notice new layers of it revealing themselves slowly, small moments that would have meant nothing to you before suddenly carrying weight, like walking into a store and buying something without rehearsing the decision in your head, like taking a day off in the middle of the week and not feeling like you need to justify it to anyone, like realizing you haven't thought about being broke in months and then catching yourself when the thought crosses your mind and fades just as quickly as it came. You start to understand that peace was always the real goal, not the numbers, not the external markers, not the validation from people who don't live your life, just the ability to exist without that constant pressure pushing against your chest. And sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet again, you think about how close you were to never getting here, how easy it would have been to accept less, to settle into a version of your life that felt safe but never really felt right, and that thought doesn't scare you anymore, it just sharpens your awareness of what you have now. You protect it differently. You move differently. You choose differently. And without saying it out loud, without needing anyone else to confirm it, you recognize something simple and final in the way you carry yourself through the world now. You didn't just make money. You made a life. And once you see it that way, you can't unsee it. The small decisions start to matter more than the big ones ever did. The way you spend a random hour on a Wednesday afternoon, the conversations you choose to have, the things you decide to ignore, all of it adds up in a way you used to underestimate. You become more intentional without forcing it, not because someone told you to be disciplined, but because you've seen what happens when you aren't. There's a quiet confidence that starts to settle in, not loud enough for other people to notice immediately, but strong enough that you feel it in the way you carry yourself, in the way you speak, in the way you stop second-guessing every move you make. You don't rush decisions the way you used to. You don't chase things just because they look good from the outside. You've learned to pause, to think, to ask yourself whether something actually fits into the life you've built or if it just distracts from it. And that changes everything. You start to realize that time feels different now. Days don't blur together the same way they used to when everything was just a cycle of obligations and survival. You notice things more. The way the morning light hits your room, the way a quiet afternoon feels when there's nothing pressing on you, the way conversations become more meaningful when you're not mentally somewhere else thinking about problems you can't solve yet. You become present in a way you didn't know you were missing. And it's not perfect, it's not constant, but it's there more often than it used to be. Here are still moments where the old mindset tries to come back. A sudden expense, a bad week, something unexpected that shakes your sense of control, and for a second you feel that familiar tension rise again. But it doesn't take over the way it used to. You recognize it for what it is, a leftover pattern, something you've already outgrown. You handle the situation, you adjust, and then you move on. That's the difference now. You move on. You also start to see other people differently. Not with judgment, not with arrogance, but with understanding. You recognize the patterns because you lived them. The hesitation, the excuses, the constant waiting for the right time that never really comes. You don't feel the need to convince anyone anymore. You know how hard it is to see a different path when you're still stuck in the middle of the one you're trying to leave. So you focus on your own lane. You build quietly. You improve quietly. And if someone notices and asks, you tell them the truth, not the simplified version, but the real one, the part that takes time, patience, and consistency. And maybe the most unexpected part is this: the things you thought would matter the most don't hit the way you expected them to. The milestones, the numbers, the external wins, they feel good, but they are not the point. The point is who you had to become to reach them. The discipline you built. The resilience you developed. The clarity you gained about what actually matters to you. That's what stays. That's what changes you. So now when you look at your life, you don't see a finish line. You see something ongoing, something you're responsible for shaping every day. And instead of feeling pressure, it feels like ownership. Like you're finally in control of the direction, even if you don't control every outcome. And that's enough. More than enough.